those that are watching, you're watching the Hazmat Guys Nation Roundtable, where we get together with some people from across the country. We talk a little bit of hazmat, talk about runs, things that we've done, things that we're going to be doing, some upcoming events for everybody, and we let the people watching chime in, ask questions. We answer questions. Sometimes we ask questions, they answer questions, and it's a pretty good time. So, Bob, you gonna say something about yourself real quick?
Yeah. My name is Bob Cosch. I'm a hazmat lieutenant, Orlando Fire Department. Still, until another couple weeks, a program manager for the hazmat tech program for Valencia College, and training manager for HazSim.
Very nice, very nice. And I'm Michael Monaco. I'm with the Hazardous Materials Company 1 of the New York City Fire Department, also a co-host of the Hazmat Guys. You can find the Hazmat Guys on iTunes, Stitcher, and Google, or website, thehazmatguys.com. So today we're going to be talking, the original idea, Bob, was what? To talk about like some of the top 10 runs that we generally do. And
right. We had talked about, I think in the last show I'd mentioned Chris Hawley, and when I took one of his classes at the the Hazmat conference probably 14, 15 years ago, he talked about knowing the top 10 runs, chemicals that you run on in your department or your area or whatever. And so one of the things that Bobby had Salvo come up with was acetylene for this particular episode. So
yeah, how popular is acetylene down with you guys?
It's real popular. I mean, especially with all the welding and everything that people do down here. In industry, they use a lot, obviously, for welding. It's also used in making other chemicals and stuff. So it's used quite a bit here, glasswork and whatnot. I'm sure probably the same with you guys.
Yeah, we actually end up seeing the most acetylene runs when we have the fires within a car garage, a workshop, something like that. Somebody lights it up, or somebody accidentally moves the flare over the fusible plug and blows the thing out. That's we've seen that quite a few times. And acetylene is really cool. It's one of those weird gases that doesn't follow any of the other rules like a normal flammable gas. It can do things crazy like react with itself, which gives us a whole different dimension and things that we need to think about when we're actually dealing with the acetylene tank and the cylinder size up and what's happened. All these things kind of go into play when we turn around and we think about what we're going to be doing with acetylene. So one of the questions that we have all the time is, I have this acetylene tank, it's on fire, is usually how it comes in. What do we do with this? So what are your first thoughts on an acetylene tank?
with the if it came in as a garage fire, first off, like you're talking about, some of the things that we would start thinking of is, what kind of, like say it's an auto shop fire, like you mentioned, or something like that. What else is burning in there besides acetylene? Or is it even acetylene? I mean, that's going to come into my mind as a first due arriving officer, whether it's you're on an engine company or truck company, what is it that's burning? Well, I know I got fuel from the vehicle, probably, unless they drained the tank, or maybe they were welding or doing some, trying to cut the tank. We've had that happen. Geniuses using acetylene to cut the straps to prop the tank, and that didn't work out so well. But so yeah, that could be a definite cause for alarm. And you start making entry, and then is this? You see a tank that's on fire, like you said. What are you going to do? You're going to put it out? Are you going to try and control the gas? Or there's a lot of different things that people need to be aware of. Or you're going to do nothing and back up because you're afraid it might levy.
And doing nothing is always a viable option in hazmat, right? You need to understand the chemical and physical properties that you're dealing with.
Right.
You need to be able to predict potential outcomes for the situation that you have. But a lot of times, doing nothing is better than doing something.
Right.
And quite oftentimes, we are not the first ones on scene. At least my company is not the first ones on scene. It's usually an engine company or truck company that's been called. So we will generally tell them, don't do anything. Don't put the fire out. Don't touch the tank. Don't do anything. If the fire is impinging on something else, then go ahead and cool off whatever is it's touching. But for the most part, we're going to, over the phone, start to size up this cylinder container. And I'll tell you right now, one of the first things we tell the company to do is to pull out the thermal imaging camera. And they're going to do a size up of the cylinder. And acetylene is so important to do this with because it has this crazy, crazy property of being able to react with itself. It is one of the few common flammable gases that has a triple bond and under the right conditions will react with itself instead of oxygen and produce a sustained reaction, giving off an endothermic, pulse. So we always have to make sure that the cylinder is safe because unlike something like propane or methane, the acetylene can burn inside the cylinder without any oxygen, and it's very, very unique to acetylene. A couple other gases, but nothing that we find in the quantities that we do for acetylene.
Right.
So we have them take out the thermal imaging camera, and we say, listen, tell us what you got, tell us what you're looking at, because if that tank is hot, and I mean like hot, hot, not just warm from a little bit of fire, but if it's got especially a section within that tank that's glowing so much hotter than the rest of the tank, there's a really good chance that fire has gotten into the tank and the acetylene is now caught on fire.
Right. Can you talk a little bit for people about the valves? Because these valves are a little bit different too.
Yeah, the valves, the valving on them is a little bit different. What is one of the biggest difference between these valvings and other valvings is that the safety relief device is not on the valve. Okay, so when I look at the tank, the actual safety relief device on a normal tank, so let's say we're looking at a propane and we have our pressure relief device, which is going to be spring loaded. It's going to be on the actual valve. The valve on an acetylene tank does not have any kind of relief device. It's actually built into the bottle, and this is a key because if you understand your valving, you may look at this and say, oh, it's a poison because it doesn't have any kind of pressure relief device, which is common among poisons to not have a pressure relief device. So looking at the valve, you're looking at that, and then you're also going to be looking, I believe, at reverse threading because it's a flammable gas. So it kind of looks a lot different than the normal valve that you would see for, say, compressed oxygen or something along those lines. But the big difference is the fusible plug is part of the tank and it's not on the valve.
And that's important information because a lot of people don't know that. And in a lot of the classes that I've been to, it's not even mentioned, believe it or not. And it's something that unless you go and do your inspections in your area like you should, and check out your first due and see what instead of just looking to see if their exits are blocked, see what these people are making, and ask them questions. Don't just it's another fire inspection we got to go do. Get into nuts and bolts and stuff like that, because like that, for instance, a lot of people probably didn't even know that.
Right, and one of the things that we can do to help cross-reference valves and cylinders and product is if you're able to get close enough to the cylinder. Listen, an acetylene cylinder is pretty obvious. It's a pretty rarity. You can generally see them from across the room and go, that's an acetylene cylinder. But if for whatever reason you can't, or your chief doesn't believe you, or you just want to confirm everything, if you go up to the valves, every valve has on it a stamp. And the stamp is going to give you what that valve is, almost like a serial number. Not really a serial number, more like a model number. All right, so the valving is going to have like a model number stamped on it. Generally, it's like what is it, CSA, and then like 250 would be an example. You can look that valve number up and see what gases it is associated with. So that can help you lead to what that product might be or helping you in your size up.
Right.
Just as a little side note, and that's true for cylinders in general, not just acetylene, but it works with acetylene.
And something too, people also need to remember, not try to get too far off the topic. Don't always think that these tanks are painted a certain color, they mean a certain thing. A lot of people get lulled into the fact that, if it's a red cylinder, that means it's a flammable gas. And that could be furthest from the truth. Yeah,
absolutely. In fact, a lot of people will even turn around and say, well, it's green, so it has to be oxygen. Right. And we're getting a little off the topic of acetylene and going more into cylinders, but it is a really important point because we are kind of talking about cylinders a little bit. So if you were to look at, there's only one time where the cylinder color makes a difference, where the cylinder color is going to be what that product is, assuming it's been loaded correctly. And that's when you're dealing with cylinders that are involved in pharmaceutical or medical grade stuff. So, for example, medical grade oxygen will always be green. Medical grade ethylene oxide will be gray. So these colors are standard and uniform among the medical grade stuff. But the way you're going to know that it's a medical grade cylinder is if it's stamped. What is it? It's stamped with the pharmacology stamp. I think it's PHA, the Association of Pharmacologists. I forget the exact letters, but it's going to have a special pharmacological stamp actually stamped right on it. And that's going to certify that cylinder as medical grade, and then you can correspond the color with what it could be in.
Very cool. So with since we're talking about acetylene, let's talk a little bit about some of the properties. With the it's got a wide flammable range. It's from 2.4% to 100%. This is
a huge flammable range.
It's huge.
And
huge.
If you break down what that means, I mean, think about that. From 2.5% all the way up to 100%, according to the NIOSH, you have a flammable range. That means there's no amount of just fuel that is a safe environment.
Right.
And we know this to be true, that within 15 psi, the acetylene is detonatable, meaning that it will just literally detonate. So right. It's one of these gases that is just, the chemical physical properties just make it a crazy thing to deal with.
And I think that's why it's so widely used. But people are looking for newer, other ways of using gases to do the same thing, which we can talk about later. But it's amazing how little disregard a lot of people have for this, because they don't understand just how nasty it is. They just think of it, oh, well, I'm just using it for cutting, or I'm just using it for, whatever it is they're doing. But they forget that, it's also a simple asphyxiant. All the different reactions that you talked about, the flammability, the explosiveness. And one thing, too, is that for some people, they don't even realize, what are you going to use to monitor it? You got your LEL. Some people think, oh, well, I got my PID. Well, the ionization potential is way over 10.6. It's like 11 something. So, your PID is not even going to pick it up. So you're going to have to rely on some of these other things. So if you had not a fire, but just say a gas, you're going to have to rely on your LEL sensor. And if it is displacing oxygen, watching your oxygen sensor go down. Some of these little things, not just focusing on, oh, it's a flammable gas and I got to worry about ignition. Yes, that's a very important thing to control your ignition sources, but there's all these other things they need to be concerned with too.
Right, and one of the hardest parts is actually dealing with the fact that your sensors aren't going to be picking anything up for a while.
Right.
Your LEL sensor, I should say. There is what is nice about acetylene is there's two very well-known cross sensitivities for acetylene. So on your 4-gas meter, your hydrogen sulfide and your carbon monoxide has a cross sensitivity to both acetylene and hydrogen. So if for whatever reason you believe you are dealing with acetylene, if you take out your 4-gas meter and you look at your carbon monoxide and your hydrogen sulfide, you will be able to see, essentially a hit on those things, and you'll know you can be fairly certain that is the acetylene.
And that's a good thing about the cross sensitivities too, is that that's something to know, because all of a sudden, if you don't know the cross sensitivity like that, and all of a sudden you're thinking you've got this hydrogen sulfide incident or carbon monoxide incident, and really it's got nothing to do with it.
Right. And it totally allows us to see the acetylene on the lower levels of the spectrum, whereas just relying on our LEL, we'd have tremendous parts per million before we even recognize that it was there.
Right. Boys coming in saying hi.
Yeah, my boss.
So let's talk a little bit, Mike, about the response. So we talked a little bit about if it was on fire. What is taking yourself off of hazmat one for a second? You're on the first dude, because as a lieutenant for me, like I mentioned before, the first thing I'm going to do is whether I'm on an engine company, truck company, not the hazmat or anything like that, just a regular first due response. I'm going to size up the scene like I mentioned before, see what I got, what am I doing, what do I need, those three basic things we've talked about in some of the other episodes, and then try to figure out exactly what's burning and what is not burning. Because there are, like you mentioned, there are some times where, hey, maybe we need to just leave this alone, or maybe we need to isolate or cool down something that maybe the fire's impinging on, like you talked about earlier. What is something that you think would be another major contention that we have to deal with?
When it comes to the cylinder on fire, or
yeah, so let's just say a cylinder not on fire. Let's go with just
not on fire.
Cylinder.
It's just leaking. All right. Well, obviously the chemical physical properties tell us that it's lighter than air. So, and the fact that it has such a wide flammable range, one of the immediate things that I would be thinking about if it's not on fire and if it hasn't been damaged and if I don't need to do a cylinders check is to turn around and get the cylinder outside, or have my guys go onto upper levels above and check for the potential of the acetylene being in higher areas. So upper floors, ceilings, attics, things along those. And again, I would instruct them, hey, listen, take your 4-gas, take your 5-star, take your Draeger, whatever it is that you're using, and I want you to tell me what the CO levels are in the areas that I'm telling you to go search. That would give me an idea how far the acetylene is spread, and then I want to go ahead and I want to try to get that acetylene container outside. That way it can just off gas straight into the air, and I got really nothing to worry about.
Right. You guys wouldn't do any kind of crazy, trying to think of something off the wall that somebody might try to do. You wouldn't treat it like a flare off of a propane tank or something like that, right?
No, we really have almost no reason to flare off the acetylene, right? Because with propane, the whole reason that we flare it off is because if we let it go, it's going to do what? It's gonna pull down to the bottom and it's gonna find an ignition source.
Right.
Same thing with natural gas. You have a natural gas leak. For example, what are they called?
Backhoe.
A backhoe.
Yeah.
A backhoe hits a natural gas line. All right. How come we don't really care too much about this? We just kind of let it go, because the natural gas is going to rise and it really does no harm. We don't flare off the natural gas. We don't go try to light what's coming out on fire. And we deal with acetylene in the exact same way. Whereas we're just going to take it outside and we're going to let it vent. We may even actually open it up more, so it vents off quicker and is done with.
Right. We're going to control our ignition sources. We're going to have some charged hose lines standing by, stuff like that. Right. For sure.
Right. Yeah, it makes the Chiefs feel comfortable.
We all know it's about making them feel comfortable.
It is. It really is. Sometimes you just got to pat them on the head.
Yeah. Anyway, so good. Yeah. So and that's pretty much it in a nutshell. I mean, if it was on fire or not on fire, and like you said, if it was on fire and using your thermal imager, that is a big key. And I think that's lost art that people don't think about. We in the hazmat world, we carry temp guns. So we also have our ticks, but we also have temp guns. A lot of agencies don't have temp guns, and another real good resource is that tick, especially if you're dealing with drums or anything like that. Phil's clicking on. I think you said it was going on another run. He must have got canceled. Come on, Phil.
Yeah, there's a couple more points with the acetylene that I'd like to hit on. So we talked before about how crazy the chemical physical properties are of it. And we also said that it's at 15 psi, it can detonate. So the key becomes, how do they store this in the cylinder? And they end up taking the acetylene, they will absorb it or put it into a solution of acetone, and then that acetone is placed in the cylinder with diatomaceous earth. All these things are safeties that help keep the acetylene from reacting with itself. One of the things that needs to be taken care of is if this acetylene tank is involved in some kind of an accident, or has had, it's been hit or it's been dented or something like that, you could actually form a small pocket of acetylene within the cylinder, and now you have a tiny little area of the cylinder that's shock sensitive and is able to actually detonate. So a damaged cylinder with a dent in it, or something that's taken quite a big insult, it needs to be considered like a bomb, because it really is like a bomb. So just be very, very careful with it. Unless you're properly trained, I would avoid at all costs capping one of these fusible plugs. You know, if they've gone off, you put the fire out. You quickly go and you put a screw in the fusible plug just to stop the leak. It's doable. We've done it, but unless you're really skilled with evaluating the cylinder, evaluating the situation, I would just let it leak.
Yeah, and something too is if this stuff is in confined space, if these things are being worked on in a confined space, maybe somebody's doing some welding in a ship, in a cargo hold, or factory someplace or whatever. Now you got a potential for these vapors collecting, like you mentioned earlier, and they can explode. So ventilation is going to be a major key when they're doing any of this stuff. And something too, when they're doing confined space, hopefully they have a meter somewhere around. They're keeping track of stuff, because obviously we could, what we mentioned before, displace oxygen and everything else that can go around or go wrong with it. But the other thing too is to have that ventilation going, because we don't want the buildup of different gases. Or while they're welding, there's some type of reaction going on between the weld and whatever material it is they're working on, whether they're actually doing a weld
Right.
or they're cutting something. So there's a lot to it that I think people take for granted. Oh, I just got this acetylene torch and I'm gonna cut. That's it.
Oh, sure. I mean, listen, I've got acetylene tanks that I let bounce around the back of my truck. Just going from one job site to another on the side. So yeah, acetylene is definitely something that it's around all the time. People don't realize how dangerous it is, and therefore first responders don't realize how dangerous it is and what they can be dealing with. So from an operations level point of view, there's a lot to consider.
Right. Excellent. Besides welding, what else do they get used for? Cutting metals. Somebody mentioned something about using it in arson. It could be used in arson gigs. Have you ever heard that?
I'm sure you could set it up somehow where it goes off, but I don't know of a specific, like, hey, this little technique is gonna do this. But if you think about it, you let it go, it pools in the high areas. It has such a wide explosive range that it's almost guaranteed to find an
It's something,
source.
right? Yeah, for sure.
It's gonna hit something.
And there's well, before we go on anything else, anything else you want to mention about acetylene? I mean, it's kind of a
listen,
you
just
got a lot
really
of the major points.
The plugs, these fusible plugs that we talk about, they can be found on both the shoulders as well as underneath the bottom of the tank. So if you'd have to actually flip it over around the foot ring, in between the foot rings, you're going to see another fusible plug. These are all spots that it could potentially leak. When you'll have two different types of flames. If you have a flame out with a acetylene tank, you're going to have that initial high pressure flame, and that's going to be your acetylene. And then after that all dies down, you're going to have this kind of wafty, lazy, sooty flame. That's going to be your acetone burning. Remember, the acetone is what the acetylene is dissolved in. So that's flammable as well. You're going to get a different color, and you're going to it's not going to be under pressure like the acetylene is under pressure.
Right. What other tanks are associated with acetylene?
You are like acetylene, or do we generally find in the vicinity of acetylene? Almost always find an oxygen tank, next to it, without a shadow of a doubt. And we've talked about oxygen before. A lot of people think, oh, oxygen explosive, it explodes. It doesn't. It enhances combustion, which is what it's doing with the acetylene. It's making the acetylene work better. If anyone's ever used an acetylene torch, the moment you add the oxygen to it, wow, it becomes from a flame to like a laser. So be careful with the oxygen around there as well, to your proper size up. We've had oxygen tanks let loose in the back of ambulances that have been on fire, and it creates quite a little burst.
Yeah, and we have that on our truck company. We have the acetylene torches and with the little oxygen bottles as well. So for using different cutting things that we need to do for that kind of extrication stuff. But yeah, it's a well used piece of equipment, widely used piece of equipment, but also has a lot of accidents because of it. Because people, I think, get complacent. Just like anything in life, people get complacent with stuff, and this is one of those that I wish I'd done it earlier, but I didn't. I'd like to see how many accidents around the country were actually caused, how many incidents were actually caused by acetylene fires or explosions. If anybody knows that's listening and wants to chime in or look it up, that'd be interesting to throw out to everybody.
Yeah, I don't know. I know we go to a pretty decent amount of fires, and they end up finding an acetylene tank, and they call us in. And we've had ones that we've had banks of tanks where there was just one acetylene tank leaking, and they couldn't find the leak. So they called us in to evaluate all the tanks, and we ended up finding the one that was leaking.
And that's a good point. You may not just have one tank; you can have several tanks.
Oh, generally you have several tanks, especially if you're running a business or industry. You could have a whole bank of tanks.
And that's something everybody should realize too. You go to an auto accident and you have one of these trucks that have multiple tanks in the back of it. I'm not talking a pickup truck, but these 4x or 6x that are carrying acetylene, or they're carrying oxygen, or they're carrying whatever, going around, and you get involved in an auto accident. How are you going to handle all these different types of possible leaking tanks? You may have a kit that handles one tank. What do you do? So you got to be able to have that plan A, B, and C ready to go if you come across these different things.
Right. And I would treat that just like I would a tank inside. Take the tank out, bring it to open space. If you believe it's leaking, if you're an operations level guy, if you're a truck or an engine and you pull up on scene and you have this, remove the tanks, or if you can, take them out of the area so it's no longer a confined space, so the gas is no longer built up, and let it vent off until hazmat gets there.
All right. Yeah, that's that call that I was mentioning to you a couple of years ago. We thought first was a natural gas explosion. Then we thought it was a acetylene tank because we saw these tanks in that typical harness that you see, and it was that carbohydrylium homemade stuff that I mentioned to you about, which was pretty nasty stuff.
Which we still have to do a pretty detailed hot wash.
Have to do a hot wash.
I don't know. I think with all my kids being sick over the past weeks and me being out with the heart thing, kind of went by the wayside. But we will be doing that. We'll have a hot wash.
Not a worry. But I just want to mention a few things about that if I could, because it kind of ties into acetylene. This particular product, and you can Google it, YouTube it, or whatever, it's called carbohydrylium. This inventor was using it to replace the acetylene. To use it
He was using it as a green gas, right?
Right. It
was going to be his way of doing a green
gas.
Gas.
And he was advertising it for not only cutting through metals, also hooking it up to his grill and cook steaks on it. Long story short, building explosion. We got the call in the middle of lunch downtown Orlando. Pulled up, the whole back wall of the building was blown out, and it looked like a natural gas explosion. When we found there was no gas, we saw bottles over the place. I thought acetylene. Until we talked to the guy, and he goes, no, it's this homemade carbohydrylium. And when we said MSDS papers, he just kind of looked at me, and they had some homemade stuff. The whole call took about 6 or 7 hours because we had so much debris, so much destruction inside that he said he had 13 more bottles that potentially could explode. So what do you do? And he's had 4 that already failed. So, what do you – go ahead.
The cylinders themselves failed, or the product inside caused –
No, both. The way it's made, without getting into the whole stuff of it, basically the way it's made involves water, hydrogen, electricity, and some other things. But because of that, it basically rusted from the inside out of the tank. And the tank was never designed for this, obviously. And he had some pinhole leaks at 4 that month alone. When it finally blew, we had these to deal with. And the interesting thing was, what do? It's right next to a railroad track for right downtown Orlando, CSX, Amtrak, and just before we started commuter rail. So that was shut down for hours. But we made sure there was nobody in there. We did, life safety first. Nobody's in there. Nothing on our air monitors. Everything was good. But then what are you going to do? You got 13 more tanks that you got to look for and take care of over all the debris. Well, the first thing was
that are potentially structurally compromised
right.
from the inside
Right,
out.
and they got rocketed around this building. He told us where they were, and where they were was not where we found them. So we had to, the first thing is, hey, we're going to send the bomb squad robot in there. Well, it can't climb over the debris. So the next thing we'll do is send the bomb squad in there. Well, they're not going to go climbing all over everything with 80 pounds of bomb gear on. So the only thing left to do was send 2 firemen in with air monitors and
probies, hopefully.
Well, yeah, no, I was one. Because the thought was this: we had to find them, and then we had to bleed them off. Nobody was going to be able to pull them out. Nobody was going to go over to get them. This wasn't, as one individual said, "Oh, I would have left it for the feds." It wasn't a federal response. It wasn't a terrorist act, which everybody thought it was for about an hour.
Right.
So we had to, with the big gaping hole on the back side of the building, we took our time. No life safety. We took a 3-inch line with a ground hugger, or down here we have a ram nozzle, and we opened up the tank gingerly. We set up an air monitor. Once we opened up the tank and set up the air monitor, it was reading, I think, 78% LEO, like that. When we turned on the fog nozzle and took that escaping gas that was coming up and pushed it out that big gaping hole, I think it was only 2%. Wow. So what we did for the next 6 hours is every time we went to a tank, we marked it, identified it, it's been checked and cleared, and we dragged that hose to the next one, to the next one, to the next one. And as that tank was venting, we exited the building. The bomb truck robot was there with its audio and video, so we were in a safe location outside. And when it stopped hissing and the readings were where we wanted them to be, we knew the tank was empty, and then we moved in and shut it down and just kept moving from tank to tank. So there's a little bit more to it, but that's the gist of it for 6 hours.
Was there any discussion on flaring?
No discussion. No. Same thing, like with the acetylene. Yeah, there was nothing we were going to flare. It was just a matter.
Why do it if it goes up?
Right. But it was a long 6 hours.
Yeah, I can imagine it was.
So, but
now what was the shape of the tank? Was he using an old acetylene tank?
Yep, looked just like it. And that's what confused us, because here we see this rig, oxygen tank, and what we thought was an acetylene tank. And then underneath all the debris, I don't know if I sent you the picture or not, this tank was filleted open. It was unbelievable.
So it went out, so showing obvious signs that there was almost like a failure of the structure.
Yeah, exactly. And ironically, in the middle of this call, because he had sold it to some restaurants as cooking fuel, we had gotten a couple of phone calls. People have been watching the news and wanted us to come tank their tank. We're like, yeah, we're a little busy right now. Just take it outside. So
wow.
Yeah.
So hold on a second. So you said Extra Cat?
Extra Cat, yeah.
Yeah. He says the primary component was hydrogen, which would make sense if this was being done through electrolysis. Electrolysis liberates hydrogen and oxygen. The cylinder failures were due to the occurrence of hydrogen embrittlement of the carbon steel.
Right.
So does that's I guess a little bit different than rust, whereas rust you could have, it's a chemical reaction with oxygen, whereas the embrittlement of the carbon steel literally means that it makes the carbon steel unable to hold the pressures within the tank, and the tank just systematically
right.
fails.
And the beginning of the whole investigation was that because of the water and everything and how this stuff was mixed, that they were assuming that it was a rusting, if you will, working its way out and causing it. Because when you looked at the tank, it had that rust pitting look to it on the inside of the tank, and that's what everybody thought it was. Derek, the guy that just chimed in, he's actually one of our hazmat lieutenants, and he worked with the guy afterwards, trying to figure out what was going on and what happened and whatnot. So
very cool.
Yeah.
So he was part of the investigation afterwards.
Yeah, kind of.
Okay.
So
very nice.
Jason's chiming in. Only stats I can find are London Brigade, 2004. They average one acetylene incident every 14 days. Wow. and then it dropped to 1 every 42 days. Well, I guess that's something. Jason, if you can chime in, brother. But yeah, so with the green fuels, that's something everybody needs to be considered. Not just the stuff that I dealt with there. I'm sure there's all kinds of other things out there. Here comes Jason.
Oh yeah, there's no, especially when you sit, you want to consider the amount of times that we're on one of these common gases, and for us, the common gases would be methane or natural gas, propane, acetylene. We've been seeing an increase in using displacement gases for suicide purposes.
Right.
So cylinders and gases are all over the
Yeah.
place.
Jason, your guy ran away. What, he didn't want to be on? He didn't want to be on.
Well, we got the team that's on duty in the office, and they're all watching. So
movie stars.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So there wasn't a lot of statistics online about acetylene. Texas had some stuff on there from the Office of the Fire Marshal, but it was all. I mean, it looked like it was from the 40s. So there is that particular, and I'll post it here in just a second. That study that was done by the London Fire Brigade that had a whole bunch of information in it. So it was kind of interesting just at a glance.
Awesome.
Very nice. Jason, how often you guys deal a lot with acetylene?
No. I mean, what we see a lot, and we have an actual manufacturing company here that builds rail cars. And I think every single station has acetylene tanks. Either they're automated and they're big tanks, or they're the welders and the cutters and those guys. I mean, they have them. There's just a ton inside that facility. But every little shop around us, every auto parts place that that's doing custom work and that sort of stuff, that they're everywhere. We have not seen any instances, to my knowledge, other than something that may come in that doesn't red flag as hazmat.
Right.
A medical call or something.
Okay. Yeah, we get them a lot for shops and stuff like that. Very nice. Have you had beyond acetylene anything much on cylinders in general? Do you guys get any kind of major cylinder runs?
No, the county next door to us did they had a cryogenic truck that went head on with a trash truck, and
nice.
Luckily both the drivers were okay. It was a really substantial crash, but I called the hazmat coordinator over there, and I said, hey, if they're going to do any kind of offload, let me know. And he called me back and he said, nope. He said they're not even going to mess with the box. They righted it, and they hooked it to another semi, and down the road it went. So really? In talking and doing some follow up, they were essentially the was it Praxair? Is that the name of the company? Yeah, Praxair. They said, listen, if you don't have the cryo gloves and you open that doghouse up and you don't know what you're doing, you're going to be dead. It's going to be too late. So, that's one of those things where you really don't want to get in over your head because you can't really fast.
Sure. Yeah, no, we tell our guys the same thing. We got these little cryo tanks all over Manhattan and on the roads. I'm just waiting one day for a cab to hit it. I can't believe it hasn't yet, but we tell them the same thing. Don't touch it. We've got the special equipment to touch cryo, but every once in a while it still happens. Yeah,
we had I don't want to name the company, but there was a company years ago downtown that had several different bottles rocket, anywhere from oxygen tanks to, I think there was even some acetylene tanks, and they shot, some of them were almost a quarter of a mile, landing in houses or by houses. And, there was I think it was the late 80s, maybe early 90s when it happened. And there was, not as big of a presence in hazmat and what happens. But they started to go in the area, and then somebody said, hey, everybody back up, everybody get out. And these things are rocketing all over the place. We need to set up a perimeter, get supply lines, and worry about the fire from a remote standpoint. But these things were shooting through neighborhoods and all kinds of stuff. So there's actually been a few videos on YouTube of some similar things. We had, it's not acetylene, but we had I think it was Amerigas or one of the propane Blue Rhino out Lake County that had, I don't know, 20, 30, 50 of those propane tanks that blew up and caught fire. So that was it wasn't our department, it was a neighboring department of county over. But yeah, anytime you're dealing with cylinders, propane, acetylene, any of these things, a little bit slower approach. You know, it's like that video that's been circling the internet and Facebook and whatever, where you see guys going in this warehouse and they pull the hose out. Well, and as they're pulling the hose out, they're pulling the flammable liquid out with them that's on fire. Right. They got their ladder truck on fire. You know. Yeah. So sometimes, you know, some of these things we need to slow up a little bit and just step back and size it up and see what, like you mentioned earlier, what maybe not to do.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes doing nothing is the best thing.
Right. Absolutely.
It's my preference.
Yeah. Mine too.
You know, and that brings up a good point. I mean, if you're talking about like a 150 cylinder, by the time we get there, it's going to be over. And so, you know, we might dig into the NIOSH and say, okay, listen, this stuff's heavier than air, it's lighter than air, whatever, and maybe we need to worry about ventilating and stuff. But, you know, we kind of discussed the other day, we bought a new A kit for chlorine. We're probably never going to use it. Right. By the time we get there, it's over.
Well, you know, that's I'm going to kind of say that you're not that's 100% wrong, but there's a very good possibility that you will still have a decent amount of product left. And this holds true with propane and any of the other compressed liquefied gases, because we've had a number of runs where we've gone on propane and the company has said, it stopped leaking, it's empty. And we say, take that cylinder and give it a quick shake and tell me if you feel product inside. And they'll shake it and say, yeah. And what ends up happening is that as that liquid off gases, it cools the remainder of the product inside the cylinder. As that product cools, the vapor pressure becomes lower. Yeah. So we anytime we get turned around on a cylinder's run, we highly recommend that we still come in to evaluate the tank. And more times than not, even a 20-pound propane cylinder will auto-refrigerate to the point that it's no longer off-gassing.
Right. Yep.
Zach's asking a question, and it's a good one to pose to you. Aside from shaking the tank, okay, so we're batting this around in here. Aside from shaking the tank and trying to figure out if there's anything left in it, how do we do that?
What, as far as physically picking it up, or finding another method to seeing?
Yeah, deciding whether it's got product in it.
Well, if it's been leaking, your thermal imaging camera is going to be your best bet, or your point and shoot thermometer, because you're going to clearly see a black line where that cold liquid is currently, and that really is going to be your best bet. Your other ways of doing it would be as if you had a scale. You could literally weigh the cylinder. Somewhere stamped on that cylinder is going to be what's called the tar weight, which is basically the weight of that cylinder empty. Anything above that weight is going to be product remaining in the cylinder. So those are your two most reliable methods of seeing if there's still product in the cylinder.
Yep.
There you go.
Is he happy with that?
I'm going to put him on camera. They don't want to be on camera.
Was that a good? Oh, I don't want to look at myself. What was that? The answer you guys were looking for? Were you looking to hear something else? Do you have something else?
No, more than satisfactory.
More than satisfactory. That's somebody who doesn't want to talk and be on TV right now.
That sounds just like my wife. How was that? More than satisfactory. All right.
Awesome. Yeah.
Thank you.
You get more than satisfactory? Cheers.
So.
Well, you know, that's a good point that you were talking about. I think that I'm thinking of the cylinder that gets the actually the valve knocked off, and so I want to clarify what I guess my point is. It falls off the truck, the valve comes off. It's not going to auto refrigerate if it's got a massive rupture,
If it's liquefied, there is a very good the
Really?
quicker the quicker it off gases, the faster it cools. So whether it's a small pinhole or a literal rupture of the tank, you could, in theory, take propane, pour it out into a 5-gallon bucket, and you will watch it boil, and then you'll watch it start to stop boiling, and then it'll start boiling a little bit, and then stop boiling a little, and it'll start and stop, and it'll kind of pulse like that as it reaches the temperature where it can no longer vaporize, and then it sits there for a little while, warms up, starts to bubble a little, begins to off gas again, and then that property cools it back down. So it's this constant pulsing of warming up, off gassing, cooling off, and staying as a liquid.
And that brings up an interesting point that some people don't think about either. Or you get the, and nothing against any operational guys, but if you don't go to follow-up classes, you're only as good as that first class you went to. But some people see this ice ball and they think, oh, I got to knock that off so I can take care of the leak. That may be the worst thing to do.
Right.
See if you can remotely take
that ice plug.
Yeah, that's good for us. So just something to think about.
Unless you're trying to empty the tank on purpose.
Yeah, then that's not good.
Then that's
not good.
Then that's
Yeah, we were talking. One of the guys just went to the HERS class, and they were talking about chlorine that came up, and we had training Monday, and he said we were talking about if you could get a towel wet and actually get it to auto refrigerate, towel stick to the cylinder, and your leak stopped.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, it's a great temporary ice dam.
It's
to try to slow the product
down. And I know we're not talking about chlorine and stuff for this episode, but just a real quick thing that I learned a long time ago. You can use medium or high expansion foam if you have it available to control a chlorine leak or slow it from progressing further, because it smothers it to a point where it's not going anywhere. And every once in a while you might see this little green whiff break through the foam blanket, but you've kind of controlled it in a little area where maybe you're slowing the process down, giving you time to evacuate where it's going to eventually go. So just something from a class I went to a gazillion years ago.
We're talking to somebody from the Chlorine Institute or one of these chlorine responders, and they've actually packed a 1 ton in dry ice or a cryo, pulled the valve with it full, and swapped the valve out, or swapped out a fusible plug, something like that. Basically the same principle, just getting it down to the point that it no longer vaporizes and swapping out whatever's leaking.
Yep, and you can do that with propane. With a 250-gallon propane tank. We did that in the same class. Matter of fact, just to give the guy a plug, Ron Gore, very first hazmat team in the country, Jacksonville Fire Department in the 70s. That's one of the classes he teaches at his place he has in North Florida here.
Very nice.
So, yeah. So, anyway.
All right. Jason, anything more to add?
Mike, I know Bobby talked about it one time. The AK, you guys had modified one for like the small 20 gallon or 40 gallon LPs.
Well,
how did you modify it?
It's not so much that we modified it, is we actually just kind of realized that it was capable of working the exact same way. But instead of using the full length of the chain, you just kind of shrink it down and you use like 10 links instead of whatever 40 links there are, and the cap just slips right over, and you just find the gasket that fits nicely, and it seals it beautifully. So it was really more of a modification in use versus actually modifying the equipment.
Cool.
So yeah, it worked pretty well, and I don't know if we've never tried to flare from that setup, but I would imagine that you could without any issues, if need be. If you had a bad leak around the threads, something that you didn't really want to flare off, but you needed to flare off, it's just another option.
Right. Cool.
Yeah.
What gasket? What gasket are you going to use for, say, LP?
Well, We have the chlorine, we have the ammonia, and we have the sulfur dioxide.
Sulfur dioxide.
Right. We have those 3 in our A kit to begin with. I'm not quite sure which one we would grab off the top of our head. I don't think LP is going to be corrosive to any of the 3 gaskets. And I would probably go with chlorine because it's going to have the closest properties to being cold when it auto refrigerates than any of the others, possibly the ammonia too. But I don't think it would really matter chemical wise which one of those gaskets you could use. But I'll look that up because I don't know for sure.
I think I see Phil popped up on the people listening. I think he's probably coming back from a call, but give a shout out to Phil Ambrose. They will catch it. He'll be on next week, hopefully.
Absolutely. Hopefully Bob will be on next week.
Yeah. Yeah, I talked to him beforehand. He was trying to leave where he was at, but I don't think he was gonna be leaving anytime soon.
So Jason, what do you set this up?
That's what. Mike, you're frozen.
No, there we go.
Out,
No, you're there. I think you froze up, Mike.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Oh, I froze up. Yeah. Do you torture the guys by making them watch this, or is it kind of part of a day's drill?
No, we've started watching it at home and stuff. So we had training Monday, and we've been doing some stuff today. And I said, hey, let's hit the office and we'll all watch it together. Because usually it's everybody's on lab through their phones or whatever. The guys in our hashtag truck are complaining because they're usually in their underwear watching the show, and now they got to be sitting here with their pants on.
Usually I'm in my underwear doing the show, so it's fine.
And that's the 2 guys on the couch. I want to make sure that you see Brian and Zach.
I usually just don't wear any, but we won't talk about that. So anyway, all right. Well, I'm gonna get ready to bail here.
All right.
I'm on duty tomorrow, so.
Yep. If no one's got anything else to add, we'll close up the show. And we don't have a ton of people in the audience. Is there anything anybody wants to add?
Going once. Good show. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Ray.
Good show. Thanks, guys. No
So
problem. Thank you for watching.
Got to clap.
We got the guys that I'm with. We got the guys that I'm with clapping.
That's
yeah.
awesome.
So these jackasses.
Good show, guys.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate it.
He has no idea what we're even talking about. What are you reading? What are you reading? Oh, he's reading about he's reading about IMS technology. So
that's awesome.
This is what we do. And Stu, what are you reading? Oh, he's reading the group chart.
Time off.
Yeah, he needs off. He's trying to square root the weekend. Yeah,
just call.
He's one of those guys.
I'm gonna shout out to our first time.
All right, gentlemen.
Rick.
First timer. All right.
Hey, Rick.
First timer.
Oh wow, yeah, he's uglier than you said he was.
Sure, he's not a bouncer at a bar.
Yeah,
is he?
wow.
No, these guys are all our technicians that are
cool.
on today.
And I think I'll be seeing
nice.
And
I think
that's Greg, who's our captain, and he's not going to look at the camera.
Well, I can't wait to meet all of them in person. Cool.
Very nice. All right, guys. I'm going to go ahead and call it a show. I'm going to stop recording in about 3 seconds. But, Jason, you were the last one to jump on. Why don't you tell us a quick something about how we can get in touch with you? And if anyone's got any questions or if you even want to be getting in touch with?
Yeah, sure. I'm the Emergency Management Director of Delaware County in Muncie, Indiana, and our website is dcema.com.
Very nice.
Get a hold of me
Bob,
at
how can we get a hold of you?
hcmtlt@gmail.com, Hazmat or HazSim, also on Twitter. If you guys have any questions, if I don't know the answer, I will find it for you. Be safe. It's what we do.
That's what we do. All right, and I'm Michael Monaco with the Hazmat Guys. You can find me at mike@thehazmatguys.com. Any one of the info at the Hazmat Guys or the number, which I have no idea off the top of my head. Find us on Facebook and Twitter as well. And as we say in our show, don't just get onto the job, get into it.
You too.
Gentlemen, have a good night.